8. First ever full-size scans. In May 2023, researchers released the first ever full-sized 3D digital scans of the Titanic wreck. Using a pair of remotely operated vehicles, the team captured the wreck and its 3-mile, or 5-kilometer debris field in stunning detail. The images showed not only what's left of the ill-fated ship itself, but the personal belongings of its 2,200 passengers, including watches, champagne bottles, shoes, and other items that are scattered across the ocean floor. After capturing more than 16 terabytes of data, made up of 715,000 images, the researchers spent 7 months piecing the scans together to create larger images encompassing the entire wreck. It's given both experts and enthusiasts the opportunity to see the ship like never before. Even the serial number on the propeller is clearly visible. Researchers hope that the unprecedented images will offer new insight into exactly what happened on the night of the sinking. They've already made several new discoveries, including that one of the ship's lifeboats was never deployed because it got stuck on a piece of metal. But many unanswered questions remain, and until now, experts have mostly speculated about the Titanic's final hours at sea based on witness reports, rather than making evidence-based conclusions. But hopefully that will change soon. 7. Long missing gold necklace. Shortly after the deep-sea mapping company Magellan released the first ever full-size digital scans of the Titanic wreck in 2023, the discovery of a long missing gold necklace among the wreckage was announced. In the images, experts noticed a gold necklace made from the tooth of a megalodon, a massive extinct shark that made the great white seem small. Current law prohibits visitors from removing anything from the wreck and the surrounding area, but Magellan hopes to somehow reunite the necklace with the surviving family members of its original owner. Staff members are using artificial intelligence to identify living descendants of Titanic passengers as part of an effort to identify who owned the necklace and who it should rightfully go to next. They also plan to examine footage of passengers in hopes of catching a glimpse of someone wearing the necklace, and possibly even identifying the person based on facial recognition technology. 6. Missing tourist submersible. On June 19, 2023, news sources reported that a submersible designed for taking tourists to the Titanic wreck had vanished during an expedition with 5 people on board. The vessel was equipped with an emergency 96-hour supply of oxygen, according to Coast Guard Rear Admiral John Mauger. But the ocean is a big place, and it's difficult to locate something in the dark depths. In an attempt to locate the submersible, a massive air, surface, and underwater Coast Guard search was underway, roughly 900 miles, or 1,448 kilometers, off the coast of Cape Cod. The vessel is owned by OceanGate, a privately owned company that offers tours of the wreck to groups of up to 5 people. And in a statement, OceanGate reassured the public that it was participating in the search and doing everything in its power to locate the missing vehicle. The identities of the people on board were confirmed by news outlets. UAE-based pilot and British billionaire Hamish Harding, the CEO of OceanGate Stockton Rush, French submersible pilot Paul Henry Narjolet, Pakistani businessman Shahzad Dawood, and his son Sulaiman Dawood were all passengers on the deep-sea submersible. But according to the most recent reports, an implosion occurred underwater roughly 1 hour and 45 minutes into the dive, killing all 5 people on board. While visiting the Titanic wreck is possible for civilians who can afford the pricey adventure, only 250 people have ever been to the site since its discovery nearly 2.5 miles, 4 kilometers beneath the ocean's surface in 1985. Prices start at $250,000 per person, which explains why it remains a niche category of tourism. But after this last incident, it's unlikely that people will be lining up to make the trip down to the famous ship. 5. The mystery ship that turned away from the sinking Titanic. Many accounts of the Titanic's sinking fail to mention that there was another ship within view of the gargantuan vessel as it slipped beneath the frigid surface on the North Atlantic during the early morning hours of April 14, 1912. At the time, some of the people who hadn't drowned yet were still setting off rockets and flares in hopes that the ship would come and rescue them. And there's no doubt that the crew could see the signals, but instead of sailing toward the wreck, the ship disappeared off into the darkness. Both American and British authorities initially blamed the SS Californian, captained by Stanley Lord, of being the vessel in question that abandoned the Titanic disaster. In fact, an inquiry concluded that the survivors of the Titanic couldn't have seen any other ship, and that it must have been the Californian. But the wreck's discovery in 1985 proved that the Californian was 17 to 20 miles, or 27.4 to 32.2 kilometers away from the Titanic at the time of the sinking. The Californian and Captain Lord were exonerated of any culpability, finally clearing Lord's name long after he'd gone to his grave. Writing for the Washington Post in 1991, journalist Ken Ringel raised the possibility that authorities used the Californian and Lord as a scapegoat during the time when they needed someone to blame for the disaster. Regardless of whether or not this is true, the mistake sent researchers on a mission to once again determine the identity of the ship that sailed away. And to this day, it's one of the many questions surrounding the Titanic's sinking that remain unanswered. In 2023, a team of investigators tackled the mystery on the PBS special Secrets of the Dead, Abandoning the Titanic. During the show, they discussed how log tampering and testimony from two particular witnesses suggest that the mystery ship may have been a vessel called the Mount Temple. But this is simply a possibility rather than a hard fact, and the identity of the ship remains unknown, despite the attempts of many to put the mystery to rest. Do you think there's a bigger conspiracy behind the sinking of the Titanic? Why or why not? Let us know down below. And while you're at it, subscribe. 4. Fatal design flaw. To this day, experts are unsure exactly what caused the Titanic to sink. And while it's largely agreed upon that the ship struck an iceberg, the other circumstances that contributed to the disaster remain largely unexplained. Some have argued that the Titanic had a faulty rudder, while others have suggested that Captain Edward Smith chose a faulty course for the ship. But a breakthrough report released in 2023 claims that a simple design flaw might be to blame. Scientists Jennifer Hooper McCarty and Timothy Folk spent 2 decades studying the sinking of the Titanic. In their newly released book, What Really Sank the Titanic, they blame the catastrophe on poorly designed rivets that were holding the ship together. In their analysis of 48 of the ship's rivets, the pair found evidence that the shipbuilder, Harland and Wolff of Belfast, used cheaper iron than they originally planned on. During an appearance on The Early Show, McCarty explained how she began studying the Titanic's rivets in 1999 while working on her PhD at Johns Hopkins University. She said that the rivets were especially important because they held the ship together. Using cheaper iron may have made them more prone to popping open under pressure when they otherwise may not have. In other words, when the Titanic struck an iceberg, the weakness of the rivets may have been a key reason why the collision tore a devastating hole in the side of the ship. It's not a particularly exciting explanation, but it's certainly a dismal one. In fact, the idea of the Titanic sinking because of a cost-cutting measure only makes the disaster seem even more preventable than we already know it was. But it wasn't necessarily a reckless decision, according to McCarty. In defense of the engineers who chose to use the lower-cost iron, she said that they would have taken multiple safety factors into consideration, and they truly believed the ship still would have been seaworthy. She further mentioned how the combination of events that led to the Titanic sinking had a 1 in a million chance of leading to such a tragic ending. The builders were also under pressure to get the ship built fast and cheaply, according to co-author Timothy Folk, who works as a metallurgist for the U.S. government's National Institute of Standards and Technology. He's also spent over a decade studying the Titanic, and to add to the pressure, there were 2 other ships being built at the same shipyard, and the demand for rivets was in the millions. This may have led to decisions that compromised the quality of the ship's materials. In conclusion, McCarty and Folk believe that the decision to use cheaper iron for the ship's rivets was made knowingly, but not with any idea that the parts were so cheap they might cause the ship to sink when it hit an iceberg. Harland and Wolff have denied the author's claims, and this is just one of numerous proposals that have been put forth in recent years to explain the Titanic's sinking. And while it's possible that McCarty and Folk are onto something, it hasn't been proven. 3. The ship that tried to warn the Titanic. On the evening of April 14, 1912, the British merchant steamship SS Mesaba sent the Titanic a warning about the iceberg that it ended up hitting later that night. The Titanic received the message, but it didn't reach the ship's main control center and therefore went unnoticed. It's hard to say whether the crew would have avoided the disaster if they knew about the iceberg, since they were supremely confident that the Titanic was unsinkable. And it was important to prove that the vessel was also fast, which is why it was chugging along at full speed that night. But it's hard not to wonder if 1,500 lives would have been spared had the message gotten through. The Mesaba continued operating for another 6 years, until it was torpedoed by a German World War I U-boat in 1918. 20 people died as a result, including the captain. For more than a century, its exact location remained a mystery. But finally, in late 2022, scientists at the University of Wales announced that they'd located the Mesaba in the Irish Sea using multi-beam sonar. The discovery was made as part of a larger effort to study the effect of the ocean on energy-generating infrastructure. Shipwrecks provide valuable information to this end, and the Mesaba was one of the 273 that were found in the Irish Sea during the project. 2. A vanishing wreck. According to experts, what's left on the Titanic could, and probably will, disappear in the somewhat near future. For over 110 years, the darkness and cold temperatures of the North Atlantic have kept the wreck relatively well preserved. But other factors are taking a toll on its condition, and the Titanic has visibly deteriorated since its discovery in 1985. In 2010, scientists discovered a new type of protobacteria on rusticles recovered from the wreckage. Dubbed Halomonas titanicae, it may be largely responsible for the Titanic's rapid decay. The metal-eating bacteria survive with remarkable ease at the shipwreck's depth, and are eagerly consuming hundreds of pounds of the ship every single day. Deep-sea currents and salt erosion are also destroying the sunken vessel. Parts of the wreck have disappeared completely, including its 100-foot, or 30.5 meters, forward mast and the crow's nest. The poop deck, where panicked passengers clamored as the ship went down, has folded in, and the gymnasium near the grand staircase has completely collapsed. In 2016, experts estimated that the wreck will be gone by 2030. They knew that the Titanic would eventually vanish, but they didn't think, until recently, that it would happen so soon. Divers visited the wreck in 2019 for the first time in 14 years, and confirmed that the wreck is in an advanced and ever-worsening state of deterioration. Last year, exploration company OceanGate Expeditions announced that a team was traveling to the site to document what's left of the Titanic before it disintegrates completely. Since then, the explorations have continued, but the future of the wreck remains unclear. 1. Mystery victim identified. On April 21, 1912, 7 days after the Titanic sank, a rescue crew pulled the body of a light-featured toddler from the water. The little boy was buried with several other victims at a cemetery in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and his grave was marked with a stone that simply read, "Unknown Child." A century later, in 2012, researchers announced that they believed they'd finally identified the child as 19-month-old Sydney Leslie Goodwin from England. But the findings were initially met with caution, since the toddler had been incorrectly identified twice before. The results, however, were more reliable this time around. In 2001, Ontario-based ancient DNA expert Ryan Parr began to wonder if there was still any interest in identifying nameless Titanic victims. At the time, it was still believed that the child was likely a Swedish boy named Gösta Leonard Palsson. His remains were exhumed with permission from the child's surviving relatives, and it was soon found that his mitochondrial DNA didn't match that of his family members. Those working on the project tracked down living relatives of 5 other missing boys who were under the age of 3 when the Titanic sank. Using mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down from mothers to their offspring, the team eliminated all but 2 of the boys. They then examined the toddler's teeth and ruled out the older one of the remaining 2 possibilities, concluding that the child was Sydney Leslie Goodwin. The findings were challenged by some, who believed that a pair of the boy's shoes that had ended up at a museum were far too big for a child of Goodwin's age. But DNA once again proved that the team had correctly identified him. Goodwin's remains were relocated to Wisconsin, where his surviving relatives reburied him and held a memorial ceremony. Do you think anything will be done to stop or slow down the deterioration of the Titanic wreck? Why or why not? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!